Once upon a time in Hollywood, there was a woman whose voice carried warmth, whose smile symbolized innocence, and whose presence lit up the screen like no other. She was Doris Day, America's sweetheart. To the public, she embodied happiness, purity, and optimism. But what the world never knew was that behind that golden smile lay a story filled with heartbreak, betrayal, and loneliness. This is the untold tragedy of Doris Day's final days. But to understand how her story ended, we must begin where it all started. Doris, Mary Ann Kappelhoff, was born on April 3rd, 1922, in Cincinnati, Ohio. She was the youngest child of William and Alma Kappelhoff. Her father was a music teacher and choirmaster, while her mother was a devoted homemaker. Doris's early years were shaped by simplicity, family, school, and a fascination with the arts. Like many little girls of her generation, Doris dreamed of becoming a dancer. She would spend hours practicing in front of mirrors, her tiny feet tapping out rhythms on the wooden floor. The Kappelhoffs didn't have much, but Doris had talent, and more importantly, she had determination. Her natural grace, combined with discipline, set her apart from her peers. But life can be cruel even to the young. At the age of 15, Doris's world shattered in an instant. One evening, while returning from a celebration with friends, the car she was in collided with a train. The crash was devastating. Doris was severely injured, her right leg shattered, her dream of becoming a professional dancer gone in an instant. For a young girl who had built her entire identity around dance, it felt like the end of everything. She would later recall lying in bed, staring out the window, wondering if she would ever find a purpose again. But as she spent months recovering, something unexpected began to happen. To pass the time, Doris listened to the radio, humming along with popular songs of the day. Slowly, her voice emerged smooth, clear, and filled with emotion. What seemed like the end was, in fact, a beginning. In the early 1940s, Doris joined Les Brown and his band of renown, a decision that changed her life forever. With Les Brown's orchestra, Doris recorded Sentimental Journey in 1945, a song that became an anthem for soldiers returning home after World War II. Suddenly, Doris Day was a household name. Her voice carried comfort to millions of weary hearts, offering hope during uncertain times. Soldiers would write letters, saying her songs reminded them of their wives, mothers, and girlfriends back home. For America, Doris wasn't just a singer, she was a symbol of resilience and love. But singing was just the beginning. Hollywood soon noticed the young blonde with the golden voice. In 1948, Doris was offered her first major film role in Romance on the High Seas. She was hesitant at first, she had never considered acting, but with encouragement, she took the leap. The film was a success, and Doris proved she was more than just a singer. She had charisma, comedic timing, and a natural screen presence. Audiences adored her. Studio executives saw dollar signs. Overnight, Doris Day became Hollywood's new darling. From musicals to romantic comedies, she lit up the screen. Her radiant smile and wholesome image offered post-war America the perfect escape. She was the girl next door, beautiful yet approachable, charming yet innocent. But behind the smiles, Doris was beginning to carry private burdens that the public could not see. By the 1950s and 1960s, Doris Day was at the peak of her career. Films like Calamity, Jane, Love Me or Leave Me, and Pillow Talk made her one of the most bankable stars in Hollywood. She worked with legends such as James Stewart, Rock Hudson, and Cary Grant. Critics admired her versatility, while fans idolized her purity. She was awarded Golden Globes, nominated for Oscars, and became one of the highest-paid actresses of her time. But what set Doris apart wasn't just talent, it was her ability to connect with people. Her characters often reflected her real-life warmth, and audiences believed in her goodness. She was seen as the embodiment of American values, faith, family, and happiness. But reality was different. Behind closed doors, Doris's personal life was filled with pain-filled marriages, betrayal, and struggles that would follow her for decades. As the world celebrated Doris Day, she quietly endured heartbreaks that would scar her soul. She would later say, "I've never found the man I could marry who could live up to what I needed. But I never gave up hope." The irony was cruel. While the public saw her as the perfect symbol of love, in her own life, love betrayed her time and time again. And though her career soared, her personal happiness slipped further out of reach. This was the tragedy of Doris Day, America's sweetheart who, even at her brightest, was carrying a shadow within. This was the beginning of Doris Day's story, the rise of a girl from Cincinnati who overcame tragedy to become one of the greatest stars of her generation. But as her fame grew, so did her struggles. In the next chapter, we'll look at how Doris's marriages, betrayals, and the weight of her public image began to break down the woman behind the smile. By the late 1950s, Doris Day was everywhere. She was not only America's most beloved actress, but also one of the most admired women in the world. Her name alone could guarantee box office success. Directors loved her professionalism, co-stars adored her warmth, and audiences couldn't get enough of her radiant smile. Films like Pillow Talk, which paired her with Rock Hudson, redefined romantic comedy. She was funny, charming, and innocent, all wrapped in one. Yet, the very image that Hollywood sold to the world became a trap for Doris. The world wanted her to be the eternal good girl, the pure sweetheart, who never broke hearts and never had her own broken. But reality was far harsher. Behind the smiles and applause, Doris was hiding wounds that fame couldn't heal. Doris's first marriage came early, and it set the tone for a lifetime of heartbreak. At just 17, she married Al Jordan, a trombonist she had met while working with a band. From the very beginning, the marriage was turbulent. Al was jealous, possessive, and abusive. Doris would later describe him as a violent man who controlled her every move. The abuse was both emotional and physical, and it left deep scars on her young heart. She gave birth to her only child, Terry, during this marriage, but even the joy of motherhood couldn't erase the pain Al inflicted. Eventually, Doris found the strength to leave, choosing safety and sanity over the illusion of family. It was a courageous decision, but it left her with the heavy burden of raising her son largely on her own. She was barely out of her teens, yet she was already a survivor. After her first failed marriage, Doris longed for stability and kindness. In 1946, she married saxophonist George Weidler. At first, George seemed supportive and gentle, a stark contrast to her violent first husband. But the marriage was short-lived. George soon grew resentful of Doris' growing fame, feeling overshadowed by her success. In less than a year, their relationship collapsed. Doris was devastated. She wanted a loving partner, someone to share her journey with, but once again, she was left alone, with her son Terry as her only constant source of joy. She would later admit that each failed relationship chipped away at her trust, making it harder for her to believe in love again. In 1951, Doris married film producer Martin Melcher. This marriage lasted longer than the others, 17 years, but it came with its own heavy cost. At first, Martin seemed like the answer to her prayers. He became her manager, guiding her career through some of its most successful years. Together, they appeared to be a powerful Hollywood couple. But behind closed doors, things were different. Martin was controlling, sometimes cruel, and often dismissive of Doris's feelings. He pushed her into projects she didn't always want to do, caring more about profits than her well-being. Yet Doris, ever the optimist, tried to make it work. She wanted to believe in family, in partnership, and in love. But Martin was hiding secrets that would nearly destroy her life after his death. As Doris' career soared through the 1950s and 60s, she became typecast in roles that mirrored the image Hollywood had built for her, the wholesome, cheerful girl next door. Audiences adored it, but Doris herself began to feel trapped. She wanted more serious roles, to explore her talent beyond romantic comedies. But the studios kept her in a box. Worse, this on-screen image contrasted sharply with her personal life. She was often lonely, often in pain, and often searching for the love that eluded her. But she never let the public see the cracks. To the world, she was perfect. To herself, she was just surviving. Among the glittering friendships of her Hollywood life, one stood out: her bond with Rock Hudson. Together, they starred in multiple romantic comedies, and their chemistry was electric. Fans speculated about romance, but in reality, they were simply close friends. Doris adored Rock for his humor, warmth, and kindness. Years later, when Rock was dying of AIDS, Doris stood by his side, refusing to let stigma or fear overshadow their bond. She often said he was one of the few men in Hollywood who never betrayed her trust. Their friendship remained one of the most genuine relationships of her life, a rare light in a world that so often disappointed her. By the mid-1960s, Doris Day was one of the most successful actresses in the world. She had starred in over 30 films, recorded dozens of albums, and earned countless awards. Financially, she should have been secure for life. Emotionally, she should have been fulfilled. But success can be deceptive. Doris's third marriage was crumbling, and her personal happiness seemed further away than ever. Behind every laugh on screen, there was a tear unseen. She worked tirelessly, sometimes shooting films and recording songs back to back, often with little rest. The schedule was grueling, but Martin Melcher, her husband and manager, insisted it was necessary. Doris trusted him completely. What she didn't know was that Martin was secretly leading her toward financial ruin. Friends began noticing changes in Doris during this period. She was thinner, more exhausted, and often appeared distracted. Some said she seemed trapped in a cycle. She couldn't escape working nonstop, giving endlessly, but never truly receiving love or peace in return. When asked about her personal life, Doris would smile politely and deflect, always protecting her image as America's sweetheart. But in private, she confided in a few close friends that she longed for something simple, just a happy marriage, a peaceful home, and security for her son. She had achieved the American dream in the eyes of millions, yet she herself still felt empty. And as the 1960s came to a close, the truth about her marriage to Martin Melcher and the financial chaos he created would soon come crashing down, leaving Doris broken in ways she never imagined. This was the paradox of Doris Day, adored by millions but betrayed by those closest to her. She was the shining star of Hollywood, but in her private life, she was often surrounded by shadows. In the next chapter, we'll uncover the shocking betrayal that nearly destroyed everything she worked for, how the man she trusted with her career left her penniless and broken after his death. In 1968, Doris Day's life took a sudden and devastating turn. Her husband and manager, Martin Melcher, died unexpectedly of a heart attack. To the public, it seemed like the end of a long and stable marriage, but for Doris, it was the beginning of her greatest nightmare. In the days following his death, she discovered shocking truths about the man she had trusted with everything: her career, her finances, and her future. What she uncovered would shatter her sense of security and nearly ruin her life. Soon after Martin's death, Doris learned that he had squandered her entire fortune. Without her knowledge, Martin had made reckless investments and shady deals, leaving Doris with millions of dollars in debt. She, one of the highest paid actresses in Hollywood, who had earned fortunes from films and records, was left nearly penniless. The betrayal was beyond financial, it was deeply personal. She had trusted Martin with her heart and her livelihood, only to discover that he had left her vulnerable, exposed, and with nothing to show for decades of hard work. Doris would later say, "I was in a state of shock for months. I couldn't believe it. I thought we were secure. I thought he had protected me. But I was wrong." Among the darkest revelations was that Martin, along with his business partner Jerome Rosenthal, had forced Doris into commitments she never agreed to. Just days after Martin's death, Doris was informed she was expected to star in a brand new television series. She had never even seen the contract, let alone signed it. Martin had arranged everything behind her back. Doris was furious but also powerless. She had no money to fight, and her name was already tied to the project. Out of desperation, she honored the contract and starred in The Doris Day Show. Though she delivered professionalism and charm as always, inside she was broken. She never wanted a television career, but she had no choice. It was survival. Determined to reclaim her life, Doris filed a massive lawsuit against Jerome Rosenthal, her late husband's business partner, who had helped orchestrate the betrayal. The legal battle stretched on for years, draining her emotionally and physically. Finally, in 1974, after a long and grueling court case, Doris won. The judgment awarded her nearly $22 million, one of the largest settlements of its kind at the time. But money could not erase the pain. Doris later reflected, it wasn't about the money. It was about trust. When you give someone your life, your career, and your heart, and they throw it all away, it's devastating. The victory was hollow because nothing could give her back the years she had lost or the peace of mind that had been stolen. The betrayal left Doris changed forever. She became more guarded, less trusting, and deeply cautious about those around her. Friends said she carried an invisible wall after Martin's death, still warm and kind to others, but always holding something back. She had spent her life trying to build love and security, but each time it slipped away. Her marriages had left scars, but Martin's betrayal left a wound that never fully healed. From that moment on, Doris chose to live on her own terms, away from the spotlight whenever possible. Though Doris had never wanted to do television, the Doris Day Show became a success. Running from 1968 to 1973, it introduced her to a new generation of fans. On screen, she was the same cheerful, optimistic Doris audiences adored. Off-screen, she was exhausted, grieving, and trapped in a role she never wanted. The irony was painful. Her most successful television years were born from betrayal and necessity, not choice. Doris described it as one of the hardest times of her life, but she pushed through with professionalism and grace, never allowing the audience to see her pain. Despite everything, Doris refused to let bitterness define her. She poured her energy into new passions, most notably her love for animals. In the 1970s, she founded the Doris Day Animal Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to the welfare of animals. She once said, "Animals have never betrayed me. They are an anchor of love that is pure and honest." To many, it was clear why Doris found such comfort in animals. They offered the unconditional love and loyalty that humans had often denied her. This work became her healing, her mission, and her legacy beyond Hollywood. As the years passed, Doris retreated more and more from the spotlight. After decades of giving everything to the entertainment industry, she wanted peace. She moved to Carmel, California, into a quiet home overlooking the ocean. Here, surrounded by dogs, cats, and horses, she finally found some measure of contentment. She rarely gave interviews and often refused to talk about her film career. She wanted to be remembered not as a Hollywood star trapped in painful memories, but as a woman who loved animals and valued kindness. For fans, this retreat was heartbreaking. They missed her presence on screen. But for Doris, it was survival. Yet even in her quiet retreat, the scars of betrayal remained. Friends often said that Doris, though kind and cheerful, carried a sadness in her eyes. She had achieved everything: fame, fortune, and adoration, but at the deepest level, she had been betrayed by love, by trust, and by the people who should have protected her. It was a cruel irony that America's symbol of happiness lived much of her life in sorrow. But Doris never let the world see the depth of that pain. She chose instead to give love where she could, to her fans, to her animals, and to the world at large. This chapter of Doris Day's life was marked by devastation: her husband's death, the betrayal of her finances, and the painful realization that even those closest to her could not be trusted. Yet it was also a turning point. From this darkness, Doris began to carve out a new life, one that would focus less on Hollywood and more on the simple joys of love and compassion. But even as she tried to heal, fate still had more heartbreak in store. In the final chapter, we'll look at Doris Day's later years, her devotion to animals, the loss of her beloved son, and the loneliness that defined her final days at 89. After decades in the spotlight, Doris Day quietly stepped away from Hollywood. She had given the world her voice, her films, and her laughter. But now she wanted peace. In Carmel, California, in a beautiful home near the ocean, Doris surrounded herself with animals and close friends. To her fans, she was a legend, but to Doris, she was just a woman searching for simplicity after years of betrayal and heartbreak. She rarely gave interviews and often declined to revisit her film career. She once said, "I have no regrets, but I prefer to live in the present. The past is behind me, and I don't live there anymore." Throughout her later years, Doris devoted herself almost entirely to animal welfare. She established the Doris Day Animal Foundation and the Doris Day Animal League, both dedicated to protecting animals from cruelty and neglect. This mission became her new identity, far removed from the glamorous star image the world remembered. Friends said Doris felt safest with animals because they never lied, never betrayed, and never judged. She personally cared for dozens of dogs and cats at her home, often rescuing strays and giving them a second chance at life. For Doris, this work was more than charity. It was healing. Although she was admired worldwide, Doris Day's personal life remained painfully lonely. After her fourth marriage ended in divorce, she never remarried. The betrayals she had endured made her cautious, and she admitted that she no longer trusted easily. Friends describe her as warm and kind, but also fiercely private. She found comfort in her animals and in simple routines, but deep down, she longed for the unconditional love and security she had never truly found with people. It was the great irony of her life, America's sweetheart, adored by millions, but privately, she often felt alone. One of the few constants in Doris's later life was her son, Terry Melcher. Born from her first marriage, Terry was the light of her world. He became a successful music producer, working with stars like the Byrds and the Beach Boys. But beyond his fame, Terry was Doris's anchor. The two shared a uniquely close bond, with Doris often describing him as her greatest joy. In interviews, Terry admitted that his mother was not just a parent but his best friend. For Doris, after so many failed relationships, Terry was proof that love could be real. In 2004, tragedy struck again. Doris's beloved son Terry died from melanoma at just 62 years old. For Doris, it was a loss she could hardly bear. Friends said the grief nearly broke her. She had lost husbands, friends, and money, but losing Terry was different. He was her only child, the one person she trusted completely. Doris withdrew further into isolation after his death, rarely appearing in public. She once quietly admitted to a close friend, "When Terry left, a part of me went with him." For the rest of her life, Doris carried this grief, hidden behind her gentle smile. Despite her retreat, Doris Day's legend only grew. Fans begged her to accept Lifetime Achievement Awards, but she often declined, saying she didn't enjoy public ceremonies. In 2004, she did accept the Presidential Medal of Freedom, one of America's highest honors. But even then, she skipped the ceremony due to her fear of flying and her dislike of crowds. In 2008, she was awarded a Grammy for Lifetime Achievement, but again, she did not attend. She never fully understood her impact, once saying, "I never wanted to be a star. I just wanted to make people happy." As Doris grew older, she kept her life as private as ever. In her 80s, she still cared for her animals daily, often rising early in the morning to feed and walk them. Neighbors recalled seeing her smile while tending to her garden, though many never realized they were living next to a Hollywood legend. By 2019, Doris was 97 years old. She had long since stopped making public appearances. Her health was declining, but she refused medical interventions. True to her private nature, she made a final request that there would be no funeral, no memorial service, and no grave marker. She wanted to leave the world quietly, just as she had lived her later years on May 13, 2019. Doris Day passed away at her home in Carmel, California, at the age of 97. The cause was pneumonia. True to her wishes, there was no funeral, no public ceremony. Her life simply faded into memory. But the outpouring of grief from fans around the world was immense. Hollywood legends, fellow musicians, and millions of admirers paid tribute to the woman who had brought so much joy to their lives. Her foundation, her films, and her music remain her legacy. Yet, behind the songs and the laughter was a woman who endured unbearable heartbreak. The tragedy of Doris Day's life is not just in the losses she endured, but in the contrast between her public image and her private reality. To the world, she was the eternal optimist, the smiling star who made everything look easy. But behind that smile was a woman who faced abuse, betrayal, financial ruin, loneliness, and the devastating loss of her son. She never wanted to be remembered as a star, but as a woman who loved deeply even when life gave her pain in return. And in the end, her greatest gift was not her beauty or her fame, but her resilience. At 89 and beyond, Doris Day remained a symbol of grace and strength. Her story is a reminder that behind the Hollywood glamour, real lives are marked by heartbreak. She was America's sweetheart, yet her own heart carried scars unseen by the public. Doris Day's final days were quiet, private, and filled with the companionship of animals she adored. And though she left this world without ceremony, her legacy continues to shine through her music, her films, and the memory of a woman who, despite everything, never stopped giving love.